Hi, this is Nick Burbules. I'm a member of the International Academy of Education. This is another of a series of interviews we're doing with members of the Academy on their research. Some of these interviews concern projects in the Educational Practices book series. Other interviews relate to other aspects of members' research. Um, Today's guest is Rich Shavelson. We're discussing a paper of his called Methodological Perspectives, Standardized, parenthesis, summative, or contextualized, parenthesis, formative evaluation. This was published a few years ago in Educational Policy Analysis Archives. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Rich, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to divide up the paper into sort of three chunks, at least to get us started. First point you make in the paper is that the distinction that's typically drawn between formative and summative evaluation is sometimes overdrawn or overly dichotomous, and that in some ways it's asking the wrong questions. That the right questions are to ask questions about the purpose of the evaluation, and then selecting appropriate methods given the purpose and the questions that the evaluation is meant to answer. Can you say a little bit more about that issue and how this dichotomy plays out in the way people sometimes think about evaluation?
Oh, okay, thanks, Nick. Let's see. Maybe it would be helpful with a little bit of context as to why this hackneyed topic of formative and summative evaluation, which has been discussed for the last 50 or 60 years. So the context is that the International Academy of Education was asked to send representatives to Mexico, to the Mexico's Institute for Educational Evaluation. And the acronym is INE, and INE is responsible for evaluating the quality, performance, and results of Mexico's education system in basic and upper secondary education. And it seeks to identify what works, what doesn't work, and strengths and weaknesses so that policies can be derived to improve the education for the country. So it's a major actor in evaluation and in education in Mexico. And so one of the questions they pose is, should we be doing formative or summative evaluation to evaluate teachers? And when I was asked about that, I thought that was a strange question to ask, because I was more interested in, well, what is it that you want to evaluate? What's the question or the problem? And have you got the right problem? Or maybe you don't have the right problem. So the first question you ask is, well, okay, that's what you think the problem is, but is that really the problem? And let's figure out whether it is or not. And whatever the problem is, then let's design an evaluation to bring data to bear on the problem. And later on, we'll talk about it's not just data that drives the findings and the use of evaluation, it's politics and a bunch of other things. Right. And so it was kind of interesting, because when we got to INE, it turns out that it was in the midst of a teacher strike, a huge teacher strike. And the strike was surrounding education reform that the president at that time, Peña Nieto, had instituted. Peña Nieto was a conservative president. He felt that education was too expensive, although we would be aghast at the per pupil expenditures there. And he wanted a quantitative evaluation to find out who was doing, quote, good teaching and so on, regardless of the context in which the teaching was occurring. And the teachers, especially in Chiapas, a very poor state in southern Mexico, were up in arms because they were dealing with kids with drugs, with all kinds of terrible situations, and their concern was not whether or not the achievement test went up, but rather the well-being of the children that they were responsible for teaching. And this was, and a huge teacher union went on strike. So, this wasn't just an idle question of formative summative. If you want summative or quantitative evaluation, that plays into Nieto, Peña's hands. And if you want a process, qualitative, formative evaluation, that's going to address the concerns of the other party. So right immediately, politics is involved. And here we go. So that's the context in which we raise the question. And so as you summarize, it's not whether you should do one or the other. What's the problem and what kinds of information you need to address the problem to improve education?
Yeah, thank you for that, Rich. That's a great summary. I should mention, by the way, that one of the virtues of the paper is that you use lots of specific examples to explain some of the points, and it partly draws from your own extensive experience in this area. So as we get past the sort of global dichotomy, which I think you've made clear sometimes is overdrawn, you focus down on three specific kinds of questions that we might want to ask in an evaluation. You call them descriptive, causal, and mechanism questions. Descriptive questions are what is going on. Causal questions are what is creating or causing what's going on, or what explains what's going on. The third is what are the actual mechanisms by which these processes or outcomes are being brought about. Can you say a little bit more about those three kinds of questions and the role they can play in evaluation?
Yeah, thank you. I'm flattered you read the paper, Nick. Thanks a lot. Anyway, yeah, the distinction among these questions came about in a National Academy of Sciences study where we were trying to think about what are the different kinds of research questions that one could have, and we came up with these three. The descriptive question is, what's happening? That is, what are the conditions of the children in Chiapas? How many have suffered from violence, abuse, poverty, starvation, and so on? So that's a descriptive question. Can we describe just what's going on the ground in Chiapas? The second question is, well, one of student outcomes. To what extent are the teachers, in this case, causing positive student outcomes on standardized achievement tests that are used in Mexico? So you try to ferret out whether or not it's a school, whether it's a home environment, whether it's a community, whether it's a larger system that is giving rise to changes in students' performance across the country, and in particular in Chiapas. And in some ways, the children in Chiapas probably were performing low enough that they hardly registered on the scale at all, given the situations that a lot of the children are in. So that's the descriptive question. The causal question is, what's the effect of teachers? And then the third one is, what's the net mechanism? So suppose you find out that variation in teaching quality, if you will, is correlated with student outcomes. The question is, well, what is it that the good teachers do that causes the outcome? And if you knew that, then maybe you could help other teachers if you had the mechanism. And it's three questions are probably for an audience more general is, when we got into smoking and cancer, the description was how many people who are smokers and non-smokers have lung cancer. A causal question is, does smoking cause cancer? And up to that point, the answers were yes, but the public and the policy didn't change until finally the mechanism, that is a biological process by which cancer was evoked by smoking, was isolated, and that changed the whole policy. Mm-hmm. So those are the three kinds of questions and the kinds of research you do. For all three questions, it could be qualitative, quantitative, or both. Mm-hmm. So qualitative, quantitative distinction, formative, summative may not make a difference.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it occurs to me, the smoking example is a nice parallel here, that often when we talk about educational processes, we talk about, for example, inputs and outputs or income, but we don't talk about the mechanism issue. It's often, to use the phrase, a black box, where we look at the beginning and the end, but we don't have a very clear sense of what the mechanisms are that actually produce some kinds of outcomes, whether they're favorable or in some cases problematic. Those mechanism issues, it seems to me, are often really crucial to get past sort of a global characterization of a problem to really understand what's going on.
I think that's right. In the biological and physical sciences, we have a chance of getting at mechanism. In the social sciences and education, it's very elusive. There are multiple causes and tremendous variation. I think it's a good goal to understand. That's what we'd like to know. But then in the paper, I talk about the Tennessee class size experiment, in which we know that reducing the class size caused increase in students' achievement, but we could never isolate what the mechanism was.
Yeah, that's a great example. Okay, so let's talk about the second half of the paper, and you've already kind of jumped ahead and given us a preview of this. You talk about three factors that influence the uses to which evaluations get put, or the sort of the intellectual implications of a particular evaluation. You talk about the role of politics, measurement, and modeling, and measurement and modeling relate to each other. So let's start off with the role of politics. Obviously, many evaluations, like the ones you've talked about, are publicly funded evaluations or evaluated by a particular organization or foundation that has a particular purpose. I was talking with Bob Stake, the great evaluation expert here once, about a project he did in Milwaukee, and he was sort of working on the results of this evaluation study. And he said, part of the problem here is the funders of this clearly wanted certain answers. And we did the evaluation as honestly as we could. The answers we found were not the answers that they wanted or expected. And he was trying to figure out how you present this information where there is, in fact, an agenda or a purpose behind the evaluation. But if an evaluator has integrity, they can't simply customize the outcomes to fit the political context or the political intention. Say more about the role of politics in evaluation.
Well, in some ways, politics is everything. Your discussion just brought to mind. I was involved in a study in the 1980s of military manpower and military readiness, because the ASVAB, the entrance exam to the military, had been misnormed. They let in individuals with lower ability than they expected, and they were worried about the performance and so on. And we spent about 3 or 4 years studying this and looking at their actual performance, quote, on the job. And we got all of these important findings. And then the economists came in and said, well, all of that's fine, but the costs are too big, forget it. And this is what we're going to do. And, I've seen this happen over and over again, not paying attention to the political action. I've seen curricular reform where you have a change in local government and the mayor or the governor says, we're not going to do this hands-on science. We're going to teach these kids and drill and kill them. So politics really does matter. And even if you recommend, well, be cautious, there's no caution. So it's important to understand the policy context. In Mexico at the time, the president of the country wanted to show to his conservative constituency that he was building a cost-effective education system and wanted the data to show it. And the teachers in Mexico, especially in the poorer regions, want to say, you've got to understand who we're teaching and the conditions of our teaching, because you can't interpret the other side. So it's kind of the black box you referred to. Economists talk about production functions. Just yesterday, I was on a Zoom in Germany, where economists claimed they had no idea what was going into the heads of students. That was for psychologists to figure out. They were worried about manipulating inputs and outputs. And so this is the controversy, and it's very political. Different people have different views of things. And so you're always working in that political context and taking that into account and understanding what the practical options are and how those might get played out is extraordinarily important. And it can completely, defeat an evaluation.
Sure. Well, that's the voice of experience speaking there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's close with the discussion of measurement and modeling. Well, let's talk about those issues and specifically the role they play in evaluation.
Well, okay. Nick, it turns out measurement and modeling is very political. And the politics here, a lot of the modeling we do, and by modeling, I mean, let's take a concrete example. This comes from the country of Colombia. I've been involved for the last 15 years working with the equivalent of INE there, but also in higher education. Anyway, they were interested in value added of the higher education system. And the reason they were interested in is that about half of the universities in Colombia are private. And some of them are very elite, like the University of the Andes, but many of them serve students who otherwise wouldn't go to college and are of questionable quality. And the government wanted to be able to identify those universities with questionable accreditation so that they could help improve them and give them, for example, case studies of similar universities who seem to be doing better. And we ran a number of studies. And to give you an idea, when you look at value added, you say, well, what do you predict students at a university to do given their abilities or their SES? And you can then make the prediction and ask, did this university do better or not as well given the nature of the students at the university? And you can compare the value added of the university in that way. And if you do that, you're going to find that those universities who take in smarter students or better educated students or economically advantaged students do better than those universities who don't. Well, okay, so you can rank order universities that way. Or you can say, well, let's take into account socioeconomic status. Now let's compare like socioeconomic statuses, and then some of the very high performing universities begin to look like the average university. And then you can go back and say, well, let's instead take into account the average achievement of the students coming into the university and compare like with like. And you find that the top performing university now is one of the lowest performing universities because you've removed a lot of the context information that students at universities teach each other, and so on and so forth. Each of those define value added differently. And we wanted the country to understand that different models gave you different results. Well, that was too complicated. So in the end, what we did is we came up with one particular model. And what we did is compare universities with the most similar characteristics to each other. And that satisficed for the whole thing. But that's where models matter, assumptions matter, and so on.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that, I mean, again, these examples are very helpful. It really shows how certain kinds of assumptions that you make at the level of measurements, modeling, theoretical assumptions, choices of methodology clearly influence the kind of outcome. I want to highlight something and give you a chance to highlight something. You're not saying, I don't think you're saying, that you can tweak these things in an evaluation to get any particular outcome that you want, which suggests that the process of evaluation is entirely political. But it does seem as if it's important to be self-aware of the fact that certain kinds of choices one makes at the outset actually can influence and shape the kinds of results that you get.
I think that's right, Nick. I think what I've learned, when I was younger, a long time ago, I had a firm belief in science. I came out of the sciences, and I believe that doing good hard science, if only everybody would listen to us, we could make education much better for everybody.
Mhm.
And over all these years, what I found is that science can take you only so far.
Mhm.
The minute you get into the field of practice with people involved, then there's a practical calculus that science can inform, but the decision about what to do, what policy, et cetera, science is only a piece of the story. So in evaluations, we have to do our best science possible and be wonderful artists in designing that science so that we could get at the question of interest. But in the end, we have to recognize that there are many other factors that politicians, educators, the public, parents take into consideration in reaching some kind of decision or action about what to do. And we have to respect that and do the best evaluation we can.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rich. This is a very helpful discussion. It's an excellent primer on evaluation theory and practice. And it's exactly what we hope for in these interviews. So thank you for spending the time talking with us today.
Thanks a lot, Nick. You did a great job. I appreciate it. I'm a little bit shy of this stuff.